The Story of Civilization, Part 2, The Life of Greece, being a history of Greek civilization from the beginnings and of civilization in the Near East, from the death of Alexander to the Roman conquest, with an introduction on the prehistoric culture of Crete by Durant. Chapter 3, The Heroic Age. Section 6, The Dorian Conquest. About the year 1104 BCE, a new wave of immigration or invasion came down upon Greece from the restlessly expanding north through Illyria and Thessaly, across the Corinthian Gulf at Naupactus, and over the Isthmus at Corinth. A warlike people, tall, round-headed, letterless, slipped or marched, or poured into Peloponnesus, mastered it, and almost completely destroyed Macedonian civilization. We guess at their origin and their route, but we know their character and their effect. They were still in the herding and hunting stage. Now and then they stopped to till the soil, but their main reliance was upon their cattle, whose need for new pasturage kept the tribes ever on the move. One thing they had, in unheard of quantity, iron. They were the emissaries of the Hallstatt culture to Greece, a town in Austria whose iron remains have given its name to the first period of the Iron Age in Europe, and the hard metal of their swords and souls gave them a merciless supremacy over Achaeans and Cretans, who still used bronze to kill, perhaps from both west and east, from Elis and Megara. They came down upon the separate little kingdoms of the Peloponnesus, put the ruling classes to the sword, and turned the Macedonian remnant into Helot serfs. Macedonia and Tiryns went up in flames, and for some centuries Argos became the capital of Pelops' Isle. On the Isthmus, the invaders seized a commanding peak, the Acrocorinthus, and built around it the Dorian city of Corinth. The surviving Achaeans fled, some of them into the mountains of northern Peloponnesus, some into Attica, some overseas to the islands and coast of Asia. The conquerors followed them into Attica, but were repulsed. They followed them to Crete, and made final the destruction of Knossos. They captured and colonized Melos, Thera, Kos, Cnidus, and Rhodes. Throughout the Peloponnesus and Crete, where the Macedonian culture had most flourished, the devastation was most complete. This terminal catastrophe in the prehistory of Achaean civilization is what modern historians know as the Dorian Conquest, and what Greek tradition called the return of the Heraclida. For the victors were not content to record their triumph as a conquest of a civilized people by barbarians. They protested that what had really happened was that the descendants of Heracles resisted in their just re-entry into the Peloponnesus, had taken it by heroic force. We do not know how much of this is history and how much is diplomatic mythology designed to transform a bloody conquest into a divine right. It is difficult to believe that the Dorians were such excellent liars in the very youth of the world, perhaps, as disputants will never allow. Both stories were true. The Dorians were conquerors from the north, led by the scions of Heracles. Whatever the form of the conquest, its result was a long and bitter interruption in the development of Greece. Political order was disturbed for centuries. Every man feeling unsafe carried arms, increasing violence, disrupted agriculture and trade on land, and commerce on the seas. War flourished, poverty deepened and spread. Life became unsettled as families wandered from country to country, seeking security and peace. Hesiod called this the Age of Iron, and mourned its debasement from the finer ages that had preceded it. Many Greeks believed that the discovery of iron had been to the hurt of man. The arts languished, painting was neglected, statuary contented itself with figurines and pottery, forgetting the lively naturalism of Mycenae and Crete, degenerated into a lifeless geometrical style that dominated Greek ceramics for centuries. Well, you can actually represent the patterns of life better if you pay attention to the shapes rather than just forming graven images. But could this be part of why the iconoclastic thing in the Judeo-Christian tradition, perhaps? But not all was lost. Despite the resolution of the invading Dorians to keep their blood free from admixture with that of the subject population, despite the racial antipathies between Dorian and Ionian that were to incarnadine all Greece, there went on rapidly outside of Laconia, slowly within a mingling of the new stocks with the old, and perhaps the addition of the vigorous seed of Achaeans and Dorians with that of the more ancient and volatile peoples of southern Greece served as a powerful biological stimulant. The final result after centuries of mingling was a new and diverse people, in whose blood Mediterranean, Alpine, Nordic, and Asiatic elements were disturbingly fused. Nor was Mycenaean culture entirely destroyed. Certain elements of the Achaean heritage, instrumentalities of social order and government, elements of craftsmanship and technology, modes and routes of trade, forms and objects of worship, ceramic and tortuitic skills, the art of fresco painting, decorative motives, architectural forms, maintained a half-stifled existence through centuries of violence and chaos. Cretan institutions, the Greeks believed, passed down into Sparta, and the Achaean assembly remained essential as a structure of even democratic Greece. The Machaean Magaron probably provided the ground plan for the Doric temple, to which the Dorian spirit would add freedom, symmetry, and strength. The artistic tradition, slowly reviving, lifted Corinth, Sicyon, and Argos to an early Renaissance, and made even Sparta for a while smile with art and song. It nourished lyric poetry through all this historyless dark age. It followed Pelasgian, Achaean, Ionian, Minoan exiles in their flight migration to the Aegean and Asia, and helped the colonial cities to leap ahead of their mother states in literature and art. And remember, Asia was a small area, it wasn't Asia proper, but it's part of why they changed how they divided the continents over towards that side. You know, Turkey staring down at Africa and staring over at Asia. And helped the colonial cities to leap ahead of their mother states in literature and art. And when the exiles came to the islands and Ionia, they found the remains of Achaean civilization ready to their hands. There, in old towns a little less disordered than on the continent, the age of bronze had kept something of its ancient craft and brilliance, and there on Asiatic soil would come first the reawakening of Greece. In the end of the contact of the five cultures, Cretan, Mycenaean, Achaean, Dorian, Oriental, brought new youth to a civilization that had begun to die, that had grown coarse on the mainland through war and plunder, and effeminate in Crete through the luxury of its genius. The mixture of races and ways took centuries to win, even a moderate stability, but it contributed to produce the unparalleled variety, flexibility, and subtlety of Greek thought and life. Instead of thinking of Greek culture as a flame that shone suddenly and miraculously amid a dark sea of barbarism, we must conceive of it as the slow and turbid creation of a people almost too richly endowed in blood and memories, and surrounded, challenged, and instructed by warlike hordes, powerful empires, and ancient civilizations. And then we're going to start Book 2, The Rise of Greece. And if I recall right, that covers the whole of the rest of the book. And I can check real quick here in the oh, I guess there is a book 3.